co-founder and CEO of an amazing science fiction prototyping company and realization company called IIeX, and they're great partners of ours. And this process is foundational to the work that led to the Hollow Room and also to many, many other things we're working on. So science fiction really can be science fact, and this is the guy that can actually do it. So I'll turn it over to Ari.
Okay. Hi, guys. I'm trying to figure out if I should stand on stage or kind of roam around, because it's kind of bright up here. But welcome to science fiction prototyping for a competitive advantage. I'm just curious, how many of you are aware of science fiction prototyping or were not aware of it before this conference, or were aware of it before this conference? A couple of hands. Okay, cool. Okay, so kind of foundational. So what I'm going to talk about today is really how do you use sci-fi prototyping in your organizations? And we're going to do, if we have some time, we're going to do some exercises at the end to kind of get you in the mindset of how it works. I'm also going to show you some case studies that we're now finally able to reveal with you and show you the process that sci-fi prototyping takes you on. So thanks so much for coming, and let's get right into it. So you saw this in Carl's presentation yesterday, and I'm going to remind you, looks like we've got some formatting issues, no worries. I'm going to remind you that we're living in an exponential age. We are living in a time where really the world is changing so quickly that as human beings it's really hard for us to understand. So a quick question to the audience. I'm really curious. Who do you think Xbox One's biggest competitor is today or is going to be in the next year or two? So we all know Xbox One, right? I have one at home. I walk into my den. I say, Xbox TV on. It turns the TV on. As an aside, that advert, the guy from Breaking Bad, he's accidentally turning on people's Xbox One consoles because he says, Xbox, watch TV, and all of a sudden people turn on. Anyway, but who do you think Xbox One's competitor is today? Anyone want to have a guess? Mobile devices, okay. Anyone else? Netflix, okay. Sony, okay. And what I typically hear is PlayStation, right? No, wrong. The correct answer is Google's Nest. The categories that we know are blurring. What we're seeing right now is a complete battle for the home. We're about to enter a world where the home is truly smart, and the way we interface with that home will be through devices like Xbox One and like Google Nest. And this is one of the problems of living in the exponential age, right? Is that we're failing to comprehend category blurring and category disruption. That's why it's so important for companies to partner today more than they ever have, and that's why things like Carl's consortium that he's setting up is really important, because it takes uncommon partners and forces them to work together. Well, it doesn't force them. They can work together and learn from each other. So Xbox One and Nest. Okay. So quick thing about Moore's Law. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. 1972, digital watch cost $2,000. It was $20 only 4 years later. And now the components in a digital watch are basically priceless. Or have no cost. 1 billion tweets in the first 3 years. The second billion took a week. And now there's about 1 billion tweets every 3 days or so. Again, exponential age. Instagram was bought. It was only 19 months old for $1 billion by Facebook. And if you are geeky, which I suspect you are, and nerdy, because you're at a market research kind of insights conference, go to Google Trends and just play with it and just type in things like Uber taxi, and you can see this exponential growth. And they were valued at, I think it was an amazing amount of money. $17 billion. Unbelievable. And I love Uber taxi. Like totally disrupting transport or taxis. 3D printing. Airbnb is another one, right? Just creating havoc. So this is the time we live in. So why are we using the same tools? I don't know. That's why we need new tools. And I'm going to show you some ideas how to do that. So we have a massive problem with exponentiality, right? Do you guys know this example? If you fold a piece of paper 35 times so that each time it's doubling in size from the time before, how tall do you think this piece of paper will be after 35 folds? Remember, it's on an exponential curve. And remember that you can't physically do it because it'll tear after 7 or 8 iterations. I've had engineers in the room, and when I've said that, they've said, oh, it'll tear after 7 times. I'm like, okay, it's a thought experiment. But how tall do you think this piece of paper would be? Those of you who know the answer, please don't blurt it out. So 35 times, we're folding it in half. Each time it's doubling in size over the time it was before. Anyone? I'm not asking you, too smart. To the moon. That's a good guess. That's a good guess. That's the best one I've had. Most people say 3 to 4 feet, 5 feet, and maybe some of you were thinking that. And that's linear thinking, but the true answer is from the Earth to the moon, back to the Earth, back to the moon, and back to the Earth again. That's a lot. That's not 4 feet, it's 5 feet. It's because it's on this exponential curve. So 35 linear steps is 35 steps. 35 exponential steps is over 1 billion. And I actually found out that 80 steps, the piece of paper would disappear out beyond the visible universe. It's only 80 steps, but it's on this exponential curve. 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years. This is from Google. We have no idea what this means. What does this mean? 90% of all the world's data that ever existed was created in the last 2 years? I don't know what it means, but it's amazing. So we have this universal psychological bias. Does anyone know this man, Dan Ariely? A few hands in the audience. Behavioral economist. Amazing guy, really interesting life story as well. But he talks about these mental shortcuts that we take as human beings. And this is one of the problems we're dealing with living in the exponential age, is that we overestimate what's going to happen in the very short term and completely underestimate what's going to happen in the long term. That's the problem that we're dealing with, and that's why we need new tools to deal with it. So we have creativity. We can work with creativity. And Albert Einstein, one of the most famous and obviously smartest guys that ever lived, said imagination is more important than knowledge because imagination gives us unlimited possibilities, whereas knowledge is limited to what you know and understand. He also said that logic will get you from A to B, imagination will get you from A to Z. So I really liked it. Okay, I skipped that one. So if you're a futurist or working in long-term innovation, you have this massive challenge, don't you? You have to deal with exponential change. You have to deal with our fundamental capacity or incapacity as human beings to understand what exponentiality means. This is a big problem, and it's really nicely articulated by Arthur C. Clarke. Sorry. Thank you.
Trying to predict the future is a discouraging and hazardous occupation, because the prophet invariably falls between two stools. If his predictions sound at all reasonable, you can be quite sure that in 20 or at most 50 years, the progress of science and technology has made him seem ridiculously conservative. On the other hand, if by some miracle a prophet could describe the future exactly as it was going to take place, his predictions would sound so absurd, so far-fetched, that everybody would laugh him to scorn. This has proved to be true in the past, and it will undoubtedly be true, even more so, of the century to come. The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. So, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I'll fail completely. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable have we any chance of visualizing the future as it really will happen. Let's start by looking at the city of the future. Some people think that it will be like this. And they're quite right. In fact, everything you see now already exists. All the materials, all the ideas, these things could be put into practice immediately. But what about the city of the day after tomorrow? Say the year 2000. I think it will be completely different. In fact, it may not even exist at all. Oh, I'm not thinking of the atom bomb and the next Stone Age. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough which has been made possible by developments in communications, particularly the transistor and, above all, the communications satellite. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other, wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age, perhaps only 50 years from now, for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London. In fact, if it proves worthwhile, almost any executive skill, any administrative skill, even any physical skill, could be made independent of distance. I am perfectly serious when I suggest that one day we may have brain surgeons in Edinburgh operating on patients in New Zealand. When that time comes, the whole world will have shrunk to a point, and the traditional role of the city as a meeting place for man would have ceased to make any sense. In fact, men will no longer commute, they will communicate. They won't have to travel for business anymore, they'll only travel for pleasure.
All right, so phenomenal prediction, 1964 on BBC. What we love about this is that Arthur C. Clarke, first he's a famous science fiction writer and a scientist, and he says, I'm going to tell you a story about the future in about 50 years, and you're going to laugh me to scorn, you're going to think I'm a crazy person. But I have to be crazy because the only way that I can have any chance of even getting close is being completely crazy. And then, of course, we have the benefit as citizens of this time to look back and say, wow, Arthur C. Clarke was really smart. He got it right. He was so bold and so outrageous, he predicted that we would no longer communicate. Of course, we do that all the time now. He predicted that surgeons would be doing robotic surgery, and we know that's happening right now. Amazing. But what I found incredibly astounding about this is he was speculating based on two technologies alone. He was speculating on the satellite, and he was speculating on the transistor. And think about the world we live in today. Think about all these different amazing emerging technologies that we have at our disposal that are disrupting all the time, quicker and quicker, based on Moore's law and other factors. What does this mean for our future? What does it mean in terms of where we could be in the very short term, instead of 50 years, say 10 years, say 5 years? And if you think back at the companies that didn't exist, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the YouTubes and the Facebooks, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. So we live in these extraordinary times, but we have a hard time really dealing with understanding that and putting it to action. So I'm going to talk about how we can shortcut some of that. So what the science fiction stories give us? So we know we're in market research, we're in the insights business. We know that we're constantly trying to find the story in the data, right? We're trying to tell stories. The reason why, and there's a great book called The Storytelling Animal by Jonathan Gottschall. You should read it. It's a really terrific book. And he talks about how stories actually help us understand content in a way that our rational minds really don't. Because what stories do is they put us under this kind of spell, and we all know this. When we're reading a great book, we kind of get drawn into it. And so now we're completely pulled into that character's world. We're not critically questioning whether it's real or not. We believe it and we're immersed in it. And that's an incredibly powerful tool for us to use as communication professionals to transform behavior within corporations. And that's why sci-fi prototyping works, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about that. And he says that fiction is more potent at changing belief than non-fiction. And if you think about it, that's what we do after a long day at work. What do we want to do? We want to kick back and we want to immerse ourselves in stories. We love stories. That's the way we make sense of our world. We're hardwired for stories, I think. So this is a really interesting video. I'm going to show it. It's called, it's by Paul Zak, and it's on the future of storytelling. And I know we have some neuroscientists in the room, but it's a really interesting look at what happens to the brain when it's exposed to certain types of stories.
I want to tell you a story about a little boy named Ben. Ben is 2.5 years old, and Ben has brain cancer. And Ben's really happy. He's happy because he's been through 2 rounds of chemo and radiation, And he feels good for once. He doesn't feel yucky, and his father's enjoying seeing Ben's happiness. As the father tells the story of Ben and his cancer, the father's voice begins to break. And he says, it's very difficult to play with Ben because Ben thinks everything is wonderful, but I know something that Ben doesn't, that Ben's dying. And he talks about how difficult it is to play with Ben, knowing that in 3 or 6 months, Ben will be dead. And yet Ben is so happy, he's so beautiful. And so the father tries as hard as he can to enjoy Ben, to be joyful around Ben. But then he says in the middle of this short story that it's an amazing thing to know how little time one has left. And as he says that statement, he has merged himself with his son. It's as if the father himself is dying. So in my laboratory, we've studied this story extensively. And what we found is that 2 primary emotions were elicited. One is distress, and the other is empathy. At the same time, when we asked people what they felt after the story was over, we really couldn't get very clear answers. So we began doing other studies on this story. So we took blood before and after, and we found that the brain produced 2 interesting chemicals. One is called cortisol, which focuses our attention on something important. So cortisol correlated with our sense of distress. So the more distress you felt, the more cortisol you released, and the more you paid attention to that stimulus. The second chemical release is called oxytocin, which is associated with care and connection and empathy. And oxytocin was correlated with people's sense of empathy. And the more oxytocin they released, the more empathic they felt towards Ben and his father. Now we did something different after this experiment. We gave individuals a chance to share money with a stranger in the lab. And indeed, those who produced both cortisol and oxytocin were more likely to donate money generously to a stranger they couldn't see in the lab. In another experiment, we gave individuals a chance to donate money to a charity that works with children who are ill. And indeed, those who released oxytocin and cortisol donated money to this charity. In fact, the amount of oxytocin released predicted in both cases how much money people would share with a stranger or with charity. What we're seeing is that this narrative is changing behavior by changing our brain chemistry. So we decided to go a little further and ask, could we actually predict before they watched the video who would donate money to charity? So with funding from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, we reran the study in which we not only took blood, but now we measured heart rate and skin conductance and respiration. And using these additional measures, we were able to identify this distress response and this empathic response, and we could predict with 80% accuracy who would donate money to charity. These individuals get paid about $20 to be in an experiment, and the people who donated money on average donated half their earnings. So we began to investigate this story further. We used functional brain imaging to identify the regions in the brain that were most active while watching that video compared to a control video in which Ben and his father were at the zoo. And what we found was that the most active areas for the emotional story were areas of the brain associated with theory of mind or understanding of what others are doing, and areas that are rich in oxytocin receptors that make us feel empathy. And guess what happens when you watch 100 seconds of a father and son at the zoo? Nothing happens and people just blank out. There's no reason for them to attend to this information because nothing's happening. There's nothing exciting. It's important to understand that stories have to have this particular structure. 150 years ago, a German theorist named Freytag called this the dramatic arc. So there are particular story aspects that go into making an effective story: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and then its denouement. The story of Ben and his father talking about knowing his son is dying has those aspects. It captures their attention. There's a coming climax. How can Ben's father actually engage with his son in this wonderful, relaxed, playful way, yet knowing that his son will die soon? It seems like there may be a universal kind of story structure. So stories are powerful because they transport us into other people's worlds, but in doing that, they change the way our brains work. And
So I'll leave it at that because that's the really important part. But what I found fascinating about that was, I've always known intuitively that when I read a great story, I'm pulled into that world. And that's why I'm a huge sci-fi fan, is if you're a sci-fi fan, you know that the joy, there's kind of an exquisite joy you get out of sci-fi because it takes a premise. It says, what if? Let's speculate. You know, what if there was an intelligent machine that can control us so that we didn't feel rage or anger? What kind of society would we have? Or what if we, you know, lived on a planet up in the universe trying to mine unobtainium? You know, what kind of world would that be? And what it does is it allows us to speculate and transport ourselves into that other world. And if the author is really talented, and some of them are incredible, it feels like we're actually there. And that is such a great joy that sci-fi gives me personally. So that is essentially the tool that we're using at SciFutures to help our clients get over this massive barrier that we have to linear innovation, to get on that exponential pathway, and to viscerally understand the potential of the times, and understand it in a way so that it's really inspiring and motivating, so that the organization can actually want to go out and create those futures. And what you'll find is that these futures are actually achievable. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Lowe's case study, and I'll give you a good example of why we live in such extraordinary times and why sci-fi prototyping can be so powerful. So sci-fi as a genre is really popular, right? Avatar was #1. I really like this quote, and if there's one thing that you guys take out of the presentation, it's this one. I really feel so strongly about it. If what you're doing in your organizations is not seen by some people as sci-fi, it's probably not transformative enough. And you can't see that. That's from Sergey from Google. And it's so true. I mean, because we have these amazing technologies at our disposal, all we really need is to put our imaginations to work and figure out ways to deploy them in really creative and interesting ways. And Google's certainly doing that. You know, sci-fi is certainly inspirational. I don't think it necessarily predicts the future. I think that's really hard to do. But what it does do is it inspires possible futures, or as we like to say, it inspires preferred futures. And when you are immersed in that sci-fi world, you think, wow, wouldn't it be cool if there was a handheld medical device that I could just move up and down somebody's body and get rich diagnostics about their overall health? And that was a sci-fi-inspired invention. Of course, it exists today at Singularity University. There's a company called Scanadu that are working on this handheld medical scanner. It's really interesting. It's completely disruptive and transformative. I know the chief of innovation at Xerox. They're working on some incredible scanning technologies. But I think what sci-fi does is it provides us with this vision of where we could be as a society, where our organizations could be, that everyone in the organization can understand. And we're dealing with such complexity today. It's so hard for us to appreciate what augmented reality means. You know, you can be PowerPointed to death on technologies, and you can be exposed to you know, the engineering behind it, and that's typically how we communicate these technologies. But you really need to have stories that bring it to life and show the human side of it. And so that's what sci-fi does. Sci-fi says, let's take some science fact, let's take some emerging technologies that exist today, and then let's speculate about, just as Arthur C. Clarke did, where we think the world could be in the next 5 to 10 years. Let's write a story about that has a classic story format, and then let's share it among the organization, and let's see what kind of response we get. And if the content is visceral and if it is emotional, people will connect with it, and they'll want to create it. And that's, I think, you know, what happened with Lowe's and some of our other clients, is you provide them with this preferred vision of the future that's grounded in science fact. And it just shows people a pathway. It gets them on this trajectory towards actually creating that reality. You know, Minority Report's another really interesting company that, Minority Report, a really interesting film that inspired some of these inventions that you can see. Again, apologize. Oh, this one isn't cut off good. But there's a company out in LA called Oblong where they actually have built these data manipulation screens, exactly the same, using AR and handheld glove devices. Unbelievable. Also, you know, inspired by Minority Report. Yeah, I don't think I'll play this, but it's basically Samsung's Galaxy Watch, which is like a homage to sci-fi. So let's talk about how we do it and some of the examples so you guys can start to get a sense. And then if we have some time, we'll just do a quick writing exercise. I'm going to skip. Well, yeah, I'll talk about this. So Pepsi engaged with us, and they said, okay, we understand that plastic is polluting the environment. Can you help us develop some scenarios or stories of the future that are preferred futures for us? And we said, yeah, absolutely. So we looked at the emerging technologies, we looked at the trends, they gave us some market research data, and we saw that quantified self and big data and biometrics are really a massive trend, and you know that. We've seen it from Fitbit and wearable technologies. And so in this preferred future, we wrote a story about a young lady in Mexico City, and she has smart clothing that actually can determine her health, her biometrics, and she has a smart bottle that communicates with her. And when she gets water every day, she gets it in this smart device, smart bottle that's actually customized to her specific needs. And not only does it have her medical or biological needs, it also has her taste preferences as well. And it's all this kind of big data world coming to life in a preferred future for Pepsi. And actually, when you look at the technologies that are underneath that, it's not that far away, and you can actually prototype a lot of that already today. So you've seen Carl's presentation yesterday, but I'll just talk a little bit, and then maybe if Carl wants to talk a little bit about it. But it started out with the story, and we went on this incredible prototyping journey with Lowe's, where the story created the vision and the strategy for where the organization could be, and it helped them understand the potentiality of virtual reality and augmented reality. Not only did it help them understand that, it helped everyone in the organization to understand it, because it's pretty complex and it's difficult stuff to get your head around. But when you put it in a narrative format, everyone, whether you're the cashier or the CEO, you get it, you understand it, and you like it, and it's fun and it's inspirational. And that led to different rounds of prototyping. We built some models, we did some AR work, we looked at all the augmented reality companies, we tried different technologies, and finally we settled upon the idea of this holodeck, which, by the way, if you're a Star Trek fan, you know that the holodeck was something that when I watched as a kid, I was like, wow, that's really cool. One day we'll be able to do that. And so we're certainly getting a lot closer to that. But I don't think that we would ever have created something as disruptive as the holodeck if we hadn't provided a narrative vision of that preferred future for Lowe's. I just don't think that would have happened. Because if we just presented a PowerPoint slide or a series of PowerPoint slides on augmented reality, virtual reality, and the technologies, people just wouldn't have understood it. It's just too abstract. It's too hard to get. And you can't make that bridge. And that's what sci-fi does. It takes content and it creates really speculative and interesting worlds that we can understand and connect with. So I'm not going to play that. So maybe, I don't know, Carl, if you wanted to say a few things, or we can get straight into the prototyping exercises. Yeah?
Just real quick, I think it shows like it's very, very linear, that path to get there. And a lot of times people would get distracted by whatever was going on that week or that month. And the narrative kept us moving forward, because there were so many different paths that we took to make that dream a reality. And I think that's the power of the science fiction prototyping, is we didn't really know how we were going to make that happen, because we had to invent technology along the way. We created IP many times, didn't exist anywhere. And it's that narrative that keeps like the North Star, that keeps you going in the right direction. And also other times we even got off track ourselves as we were developing tech and developing new solutions. But then we come back to the story like, whoa, that doesn't fit with the narrative, what we're trying to build. And so, it's messy. Like, we always talk about it's messy building new things and doing new things, but it's very, very worth it.
Yeah, thanks. So some of you might be in the innovation space, some of you might be in the communication. Yeah, question. Yeah.
Question for both of you.
Yeah.
How many provisionals or how many patents have you guys filed in that process?
Yeah.
So we won't say exactly how many out loud, but many. So part of it too is that this is so powerful that it is a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
So we wanted to show what we were doing, but the intricacies are the magic as part of it. But it has produced a lot, and not just with the holodeck, but other things that we're working on as well. That are I'm sure. Wow, my powers are back. I'm sure no one would ever think Lowe's would be working on that, and that's part of the goal too with this.
Yeah. And I'll just jump in there. Like, when we do our workshops with our clients, we have walls of IP. We actually call it the wall of IP, and it's mind-blowing. Once you give people the space and the tools to use their imaginations in a storytelling format, in a controlled way, it generates a ton of IP. It's really cool. Yeah. No.
innovation, it's
Yeah.
based upon the story. So then how did you guys quickly, right, go out and identify how am I going to fill this gap
Yeah.
in terms of resources to help me further innovate and close on that issue?
Yeah, so we have partnerships with incubators. So we have a partnership with USC, Viterbi School of Engineering. We're plugged into SU, Singularity University, which, by the way, is amazing. If you haven't been there, try get there. It's incredible. So we have kind of our network. But sometimes you have to build it yourself. You have to actually hack stuff together, which is always fun and challenging. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got to be nimble, you've got to be quick. And during this innovation process, we've actually had to change course because new technologies have come out. So we've been on a development pathway, and all of a sudden something sped by us, and we've had to readjust our path. It's really interesting. All right. So I think we've got a little bit of time. So so you can use sci-fi prototyping to help your organization, to help you communicate this disruptive and preferred future within your organization using sci-fi storytelling grounded in science fact. So there's a communication ability, offering, and there's also an innovation offering. So you can actually end up prototyping and building stuff too. So I'm going to move through all this. Let's get to a story. So I'm going to skip through this because we've got 10 minutes. I think it's enough time to do it. So if you have a piece of paper in front of you right now, I want you to follow this format. And it's a story spine. It's quite simple. But this is just one example of one exercise that we do in our workshops. But it'll give you an idea of how a narrative can lead you somewhere really interesting. So this is a story. If we're writing a story spine story about Dropbox, this is what we would say. So once upon a time, Josh was planning a trip to Africa. And every day he saved his trip information on different computers and devices until one day his friend recommended Dropbox. And because of this, Josh seamlessly synced his trip information across all his devices. And because of this, he had access to all his trip information at all times until finally he returned from his trip with lots of photos. And ever since that day, he used Dropbox to sync his files and share photos with his friends. So it's just a simple story spine telling the Dropbox story. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes now to write your own story using this story spine and just complete the sentence. So once upon a time, or in the near future, ... And every day. And you can either write a dystopian sci-fi story, so a story that radically disrupts or cripples your business, so you kind of, unfortunately, you shut down or you're unemployed. Or you could write your utopian story, which is the complete opposite of that, right? It's amazing outcome. You disrupt your cells instead of being disrupted. You become a powerful and dominant organization. So follow the story spine. Take 5 or so minutes. Do it as quickly as you can. And then maybe we'll have a chance just to share 1 or 2 of them out. And then we're going to break for lunch. So I'm sorry it was a little compressed, but I wanted to get the workshopping part in because we did promise it as a bit of a workshop. So if you still have any questions, let me know. But all you're doing is just completing the sentence. So once upon a time, or in the near future, I used to work at so-and-so, or I woke up and my job was da-da-da, whatever that may be. Just follow the story spine. Do it right now and try and do it within 5 or 6 minutes. And if you want to collaborate with the person next to you and write a combined story, that's fine too. Any questions? Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. It's gone. Yeah. Sorry, can we put my slides back up again? I'm sorry. I clicked off the story spine. Can we get my presentation back up? Thank you. There you go. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll just give it one more minute. Sorry, I know it was a little rushed. I'm just curious, how many of you wrote the dystopian version? Only one, only two. Excellent. Dystopia. How many wrote dystopia? 5 or 6. Okay. Was it easy or hard? Easy, yeah. That's a shame. All right, so let's maybe we can share out a couple of stories. So, does anyone want to read out their dystopian or utopian sci-fi story? Do you have the hand mic? We can. Thank you. Anyone? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Once upon a time, I built a car that drove itself to the store, and because of that, we were able to help people travel without wasting time en route, and because of that, people started playing lots more electronic games and watching more Netflix. And of course, happy hour became a big deal all over again.
Thank you. I don't know if that was utopian or dystopian, but it certainly has both those themes. Yeah. Anyone else want to have one last readout? All right, guys. Oh, yeah, one more. Okay. Okay. Half a story. Okay.
So, once upon a time, people started injecting coffee into their veins and did this at home via a special injection computer type coffee press. And every day, all our coffee customers were advising a coffee chain. Were at home injecting themselves. Until one day we figured out that we can host some of the injections in a more structured way. And because of this, we gathered all our top people together to figure out how we could innovate on the injection coffee party. And so that's where I got to.
Cool, cool. And I mean, biohacking is a big trend. It's starting to emerge, and I think we'll see kind of more of that on the fringes, and then it'll certainly. So that's great. That's exactly the sort of disruptive thinking where new IP and new ideas can come out. It starts off maybe a bit extreme, but then when you bring it back, there's really interesting stuff around the fringes that you can work with. So thank you for sharing. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you. And so I think SSI will be hosting lunch, so I think We're going to have some words from them. Thank you. Thanks.